And you haven't heard anything about, say, plans to sabotage Kittredge's work? Professor and I didn't part under the best of circumstances, she said evenly. But you don't know a lot about how this anti-tech system of this works, don't you? I know how it worked some time ago, though we have had it modified greatly since then, she answered, moving towards the door. Basically, the system is based on RF waves, radio frequency waves emitted at a high oscillation rate. Once you find the exact oscillation rate, you can either shatter any tech chip in existence. When you broadcast at high frequency RF from a powerful satellite station, you'd be able to destroy most of the world's supply of tech chips all at once. If a tech cartel, or combo of same, could come up with a way of circumvent this upcoming electronic Passover, cook up a chip that was immune, they'd have a very lucrative monopoly, wouldn't they? He left his latest seat. Perhaps they would. I'm not, however, at all interested in the activity of the tech cartels, or in your activities, Mr. Gomez. I'm afraid, considering the hour, that I must ask you to leave. He sat down on the metallic sofa, resting his arm on the sofa back for a moment. You see, Doctor, that case that Jack Carrington and I are here working on, you do know Jake, don't you? We've met. It was in Mexico, I believe. Jake and I are partners. He's the one who didn't break his leg. I assure you, I'm sorry you were once injured, somewhat indirectly to be sure, because of me, yet we think there's a tech angle to the murder we're investigating. I was hoping you'd be able to assist us. I can't help you in any way. She opened the door. Good night now, Mr. Sanchez. Gomez! Smiling, he walked to the door away. Well, it's been jolly meeting you in person at long last. Buenas noches. He left her apartment, started whistling, walked to the corner, and turned onto a side street. He made his way to his rented land car and climbed into the drive seat. They working, Chiquita? Natalie was sitting, slightly haunched, in the passenger seat and listening to a set of portable earphones. Yes, sir, all the min-bugs you planted seem to be functioning just fine, she informed him. Dr. Danningberg, by the way, talks to herself. Many brilliant people do. Me, for instance. She's talking to herself about you right now. Want to hear? Nope. The reporter said, I only agree with half the negative things she's saying about you. I'm eternally grateful for your support. He started the car. Oh, I'm sorry. I got confused. That's for my reading Tech Lab every day. Got the wrong book there. Let me switch over to the book we're here for, which is the Glastonbury Romance. I don't know how I got them confused. They sound very similar, you know. All the talk about techs and androids. Anyway. But the only remark that Red's mother made when she heard this and beheld the feathered apparition was as follows. "'Tisn't, only to die, that little Benarker as crowd. I've heard. I'm in one street long after they placed all them feathers on his poor little head." I don't know what that's about. Doesn't matter right now. Grandmother Cole expressed astonishment. As a summit-born woman, a native of Gwaelad Yiv Hav, she had much more power of accepting illusion than this daughter of the East End. That feathered object, 4 feet high, with a huge red comb, was to her as real as the tower at the top of the Tor. It disturbed her mind to think of it as concealing little Ben Hawker or his friend's alley. "Big thick bird, little Ben, then," she murmured. "What things be coming on the world, when little Ben, whose birth I do mind, and I cost his mother a sore time, should be a-crowing like a cock and making thick-bearded men holler and run." St. Peter's remorse of mind did indeed seem to so extreme that it almost looked as if he were going to seek refuge from his shame in the arms of Lady Rachel. So far down the hill was he now flying. The Dubliners had told him to run towards the audience and utter his tragic soliloquy so that every word could be heard. Ned Atling had composed one of his best poetical rhapsodies for this rock of the apostolic church, but he had not expected the ringing tones with which, only a few paces from the astonished Lord P., St. Peter howled out his lines. But Father Paleologue, Mary was relieved to note, seemed well pleased by this episode. "It's as if used to be in the old miracle plays," he whispered, leaning forward with flashing eyes. "I wouldn't have missed this for the patriarchat. And look at Christ watching him over his shoulder. There's been genius in the invention of this. I wish my Greeks could see it." The retreat of the errant saint, when he realized how far he had run, was even a greater masterpiece of shame. His back, as he slunk off to one of the Arthurian pavilions, was the back of all the deniers of their love since the world began. "And it's only Billy Bates, the pilgrim's bootblack," thought Mary. And she began to tell herself that this triumph of her John was worth all her sacrifices. And now, according to the strange and primitive Gothic picture that Mr. Geard had caused to be painted upon the slopes of Turris Vitra, like a veritable enchantment of his favorite Merlin, the moment came for the binding of Mr. Evans upon that great cross of wood. It had been the fidgety persistence of the man himself that had got them at last, or rather got Mr. Johnson of the Great Western Station, Timberyard, to make that cross out of oak. Nothing but oak, and oak, too, from one of the spinneys of Wickwood, would satisfy this lover of the Druids. "Don't 'ee look, girlie, don't 'ee look," whispered Sally Jones to Tossie Stickles. "'Twill upset 'ee to see that cruel soldiers torment thick poor man." "But 'tis only Mr. Evans," protested the imperturbable Tossie. "And they be only tying of he. They bain't nailing or he, nor nothing." "Don't ye look, girlie," repeated her friend. "Just shut your eyes tight, and I'll report to ye how things be with the man, and how to bear up under being crucified. They're lifting up him now. Oh, look-see, they're hauling of him up." "Shut your eyes, Toss. Mercy on us, shut your eyes." But it was the sympathetic Sally, and not the prospective girl-mother, who was now the one to shut her eyes. "You tell I, then, how he be bearing it," she murmured now. "'Tis nothing to see, Sal, 'tis nothing to take on about so. 'Twere much worse when I did see a sheep killed in old man Chinnock's shed in the same very field. It says were like a sheep, it says were and dumb like a sheep in slaughter." The tender-hearted Sally was crying now, but Tossie, keeping the palms of her hands pressed against her bowels of compassion, continued to stare at the motionless figure suspended on the cross. Yeah, it was left to the acute Mr. Weatherwax to remark to Penny Pitches that there were no thieves by the Lord's side. "This be a poor crucifixion," he grumbled. "This be a stingy crucifixion when they only got one cross to set up." I think he's got a point there. "Thee be worse nor Pontius Pilate, Isaac," replied Penny. "It be the same to the good Lord, whether he be hung in company or hung single, and since it be for we sinners anyway—" Old woman," whispered Mr. Weatherwax, "thee don't really think, do 'ee, that the murdering of one honest man could save such beggars and bitches as we be? I bain't what you might call an infidel, but there don't seem no justice nor right, to my mind, in me and you being left off because of people persecuting one good man, like thick poor man over there. Anyway, 'tis not my tormenting folk that good parsnips be growed, and good tatties be dug. What us wants in this here town be more men with authority, not more of these here play actors." Father Paleologue kept drawing deep breaths of satisfaction all the time. He was interested to observe that the two bearded monks from the Caucasus seemed profoundly impressed. The younger of the two, so he whispered in Mary's ear, but she was too much afraid of starting to corroborate his words, was weeping openly and passionately. How deeply this Byzantine scholar thanked his stars that good luck had thrown one of John's proclamations into his path. He would never forget this stupendous spectacle. Mr. Evans's figure, as it hung there between the two heraldic pavilions, they had carried away Arthur's dragon flag, had a dim grandeur that was really startling. The man looked majestic, a real murdered man-god, hanging there between earth and heaven, and the intense greenness of the hill behind him, with that erect, immobile tower, and the gleam of the Roman swords, and the richness of the Hebraic garments, and all this huge gathering of the people, hushed, awestruck, solemnized, gave to that single figure, suspended against the grassy steep, a magnitude of importance that was overpowering. "What are those old men counting up their money for?" "Mother, mother!" whispered Mr. Stilly reproachfully, for it was one of his parents who uttered these words. "That's the 30 pieces of silver." "It's easy for you, Robert, of course," retorted the old lady testily. "Your father and I haven't had your privileges at the bank, but to me it looks more like round bits of wood covered with gilt tinsel." It was not given to Mr. Stilly's parents, much as they loved the quiet game of dominoes, to catch the horrible pathos of the way Judas was now behaving. Perhaps at that whole vast assembly only Father Paleolog and one other realized the full poignancy of the acting of Judas. That other was Morgan Nelly. The little girl uttered no word. She allowed Jackie to explain to Sis that it was Judas who was being repulsed by those old men with the money bags, and that he was now going out to hang himself. Jackie explained that these old men were now saying, "What is that to us? See thou to that," and that Judas was now going to hunt for a good place to see to it from. But Morgan Nelly's heart leapt up in sympathy as she followed the figure of Judas, wandering among some small thorn bushes in a path of stunted hollies, looking in vain for what he wanted. In the end, he disappeared behind the western pavilion, and long before he had disappeared, the main interest of the pageant had shifted from him altogether. But the little girl heart was still with him. She knew who it was. While the public knew him as a crazy and good-for-nothing elder brother of the Nietzschean young man at Wallops, Nellie Morgan knew him as old Mr. Booty, who used to read Grimm's fairy tales on the cricket fields when his side was in. Hallelujah. The Madonna now, all dressed in dusky blood color save for her sky blue robe, was clinging to the foot of the cross, while near her the Roman soldiers were throwing dice and playing cards in stiff circles upon the green grass. Momus, perched upon the steps of the empty judgment seat, was idly tossing up a toy balloon into the air and catching it as it came down. And to give the scene its true character, as some old Flemish painter would have visualized it, as a tragedy, namely, that drew its poignance from the pell-mell of that human life which was so indifferent to its superhuman anguish, either the Dubliners or Adeling had brought it about that Pilate and Cassius should be playing chess together as a little round table in front of that western pavilion behind which Judas had withdrawn to hang himself. Persephone's grief at the foot of the cross that bore Mr. Evans was the finest piece of acting in the whole pageant. Its emotion was so sincere that it swept the whole picture together as nothing else could have done. The girl's monumental gestures were like those of some classic representation of her own namesake, the great goddess of the dead. Her sublime suffering gave a strange unity to all the minor groups and personages, their business, their occupations, their pastimes. She seemed to gather the diurnal preoccupations of the whole race together, and with passionate solicitude to offer it up, like a cup of hyssop, to the lips of the dying. The other Marys, Mary the sister of Lazarus and Mary Magdalene, came now to Our Lady's side, however, and with their approach, an unhappy crisis in the directing of the performance came to the surface. And I suppose we should stop now before the next calamity begins. But before I end today, I would like to again apologize for reading some of Tech Lab earlier. I got the dates confused. And also to let us know that we're on page 600 now. So 600 pages I've read. So isn't that something? Well, until next time, please stay safe out there. God bless, and I'll see you in Glastonbury. Cheers.